What if everything we've been told about autoimmunity is wrong? I'm Elizabeth Yarnell. After awakening partially blind one morning in 1999, a doctor told me my multiple sclerosis would put me in a wheelchair within 10 years. I refused to accept that as the end of the story, so I started investigating. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, the podcast that uncovers the inflammation lurking underneath your ailments. Because autoimmune and chronic conditions should not be viewed as death knells when they are actually alarm bells. I'm a traditional naturopath and founder of the Inflammation Academy. And in 2 episodes every week, we dig into what conventional medicine might be missing. If you're living with chronic or unexplained symptoms, this investigation is for you. Your body has been trying to tell you something. Let's start listening. Hello and welcome today. I'm so excited to introduce everyone to Dr. Sam Shay, one of my favorite people who I've known for a very long time, several years at least. So I'm just going to read off his bio because there's so much here that there's no way that I could, if I just tried to do it off the cuff, that I could bring it all up because Sam, or Dr. Shay, I should say, is a very multidimensional person. And our conversation today is going to focus on genetics and the genetics of inflammation. So, Dr. Sam Shay, DC, IFMCP, is a functional medicine expert, speaker, and stand up comic who helps people unlock their ideal diet, reduce inflammation, and reclaim energy by decoding their DNA and calming their nervous system. After healing himself from years of chronic fatigue, sugar addiction, anxiety, and insomnia, Dr. Sam turned his personal breakthrough into a mission. With over 25 years of experience in nutrition science, mind-body medicine, and genetics, he now guides others in building personalized health strategies rooted in their unique biology. Dr. Sam is the creator of the DNA Decoded program and the Neuroharmony model, 2 frameworks that fuse precision-based genetic insights with trauma-informed nervous system-first care. His work helps clients identify food triggers, understand how their body handles stress, and create targeted plans that support clarity, resilience, and longevity. Whether supporting exhausted patients, health-conscious professionals, or individuals seeking sustainable transformation, Dr. Sam makes cutting-edge science feel human, hopeful, and empowering. Oh, can I even say that word? Empowering. Featured on over 200 podcasts, stages, and summits, he delivers each conversation with insight, warmth, and a dose of sharp humor, helping audiences turn their genetic blueprint into a roadmap for thriving. Welcome, Dr. Sam.
Thanks, Dr. Yarnell. Or should we just call ourselves Elizabeth and Sam?
I think that's better.
Okay, sounds
That
good.
works for me. So, before we get further into like genetics and inflammation and how that all connects, which it absolutely does. And first, I just want to confess that I have done genetic testing with Dr. Sam myself and gone through it with him in depth for over a couple hours in a session. And it is really astonishing. I have to say, I can't stop thinking about the genes that I didn't even know I had that were influencing my body and my performance and really my life every day. But let's start first, Sam, and talk about what is your history? How did you get into this? What led you here?
Sure. The truncated version is, I mean, the overall pattern is very similar. It's a wounded healer archetype, where in an earlier stage of my life, in my case, starting at 6 years old, I had a really specific set of severe health challenges that were enduring and formative. And then through the process of me figuring out that I had these things had names and processes, and then figuring out how to get out of it all throughout that entire journey, developing my own toolkit to help others shorten their learning curve so they don't have to suffer and struggle through the long version of it like I did. So that's the overarching narrative of the wounded healer. It's so common. It's the Greeks put Chiron, the wounded healer, up in the stars. And
Uh-huh.
so that's my narrative. The details differ from person to person, but the arc is the same. Some of the details include um, a crippling insomnia growing up for 12 years, from age 6 to 18, to the point where it stunted my growth. Really bad digestive problems that were very embarrassing and painful, and neither of my medical doctor parents nor my pediatrician thought that not being able to go number two once every 3 to 5 days, I thought that was quote normal. Being raised on just terrible food of just high gluten bagels, low fat milk. I can't believe it's not butter. I mean, my medical doctor parents put me on a low fat diet when I was 7, and just candy, fast food. Dinners had some semblance of real food, but uh and then there's a tremendous amount of stress at school with violence and gaslighting, and it wasn't the best situation at home either. So it led to video game addiction, sugar addiction, chronic pain, um, mentioned insomnia, anxiety, depression. Just it was not good. And I decided in high school to take charge of my own health because my parents were more interested in medicating me into submission than actually dealing with the lifestyle, environmental, and constitutional factors of my system that were making me so ill. It turns out I also had Lyme disease from being bit by a tick in summer camp as a kid, but no one took my fatigue seriously except I was being told that I was attention seeking, which I wasn't. I was just exhausted and wanting help. So the I was supposed to be a third generation medical doctor, but instead I took a pivot into natural medicine. So I went to college very clearly on a mission to um, go into a program of natural medicine, but at a doctorate level. So um, did lots of holistic health practitioner training on weekends and evenings in college. Graduated top of my class, and then went to traveled around for a bit doing service work, and then went to chiropractic school and did really got heavily into functional neurology, nutrition, and uh, became the kind of seminar junkie and just studied all these different fields. And then when I graduated, and I had been traveling around the country teaching other chiropractors how to pass their national registration exams, basic sciences, clinical sciences, X-ray analysis. I then went abroad to New Zealand to open my first practice, which I practiced in New Zealand for 8 years. While I was there, I got an acupuncture degree, got very involved in functional medicine, studying with Dr. Kalish later on the Institute for Functional Medicine. But that's where I got started with genetics, is in 2016. So it's 10 years now. And my when I was studying genetics and relating it back to, and again, the whole point was like, why am I so unwell? How can I figure
Mm-hmm.
out all these different pieces? And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
gathering all these different pieces to figure out what was going on. And then when I ran my genetics, it revealed so much that none of the other disciplines or tests showed. And that's not to take away from the value that those tests and other disciplines had. They had tremendous value, but it was a massive missing piece that the other parts could not answer on their own. So what was revealed to me in my genetics was that I as well am a hyperinflamer. And for me in my 30s, when I had this chronic joint pain across both my hands, like an 80-year-old man. And I didn't understand what was going on because I was eating all organic, local. I was doing functional testing, taking my 1 gram of fish oil, taking all these other, supplements and doing all the things, but I was still in a lot of pain. And I also was getting like rashes on my skin, and I had I just I had these energy up and downs, mood cycling up and down, and then still having digestive concerns, not nearly as bad as it was growing up. I think it was way better, but still just having bloating and all these other like embarrassing issues, but not nearly to the degrees it was earlier. Then I ran my genetics, and I learned that from my genetics I was a hyperinflamer. And what that means is that in genetics, not all genes are have equal weight when it comes to health. So, for example, the main celebrity gene out there in the zeitgeist is MTHFR, and it's a
Uh-huh.
celebrity gene, and it suffers from founder's effect, where like w- the term Xerox is the name of a company, but it became a verb. Hoover was the name of the first company, but it became a verb.
Kleenex.
The Kleenex, we now say the word Google as a verb. That's why they changed
Hmm.
the legal name, because as soon as a noun is a verb, then it becomes non-patentable. You can't protect it by copyright or whatever, the trademark, whatever it is. So, um, MTHFR had this founder's effect where it was the first real gene that a lot of people knew in the public was like had significant consequences. But it's actually not the most important gene to check for. It's actually quite downstream. It's actually the inflammatory genes are the highest priority. And there's hundreds of genes related or directly or indirectly to inflammation. So this test looked at the top 15 or so most important inflammatory genes, and I had 13 out of 15 as having bad versions, or what's called yellow
Wow.
or red dots, or for
Uh-huh.
the Scrabble enthusiasts slash people who are in the business, heterozygous or homozygous variant. Heterozygous meaning one is the good copy, one's a bad copy, or it's called a yellow dot.
Uh-huh.
Homozygous variant means it's two of the same, but it's two of the same with the variant or the bad type, air quotes bad type, so it's a red dot. Homozygous wild type means it's two of the same, but it's the good version, so it's green dot. So it's like traffic light system, green, yellow, red. And I had 13 out of 15 as red or yellow, which means that it's a mistake to look at a single gene at a time, except in very specific circumstances. And so if you're looking at it's like the number of roadblocks you have to go through on a street. You have to go through like a couple or like 13 of them. And
Hmm.
so my hyperinflammation meant that trivial inflammatory stimuli had an exaggerated response. And 1 gram of fish oil and this other stuff I was doing just simply wasn't sufficient. And I learned about epigenetics and more practically about what's called nutrigenomics. So those are two very important terms. So epigenetics is how one's environment and behavior influences the expression of a gene. So it's not appropriate to think of these genes as an on-off switch, but more as a
Uh-huh.
dial. It's a dial. And then the version of it, the green dial, the red dial, or the yellow dial version,
Uh-huh.
determines what the range is of the dial. And like where is the dial, like where is the default setting of the dial? And then also how far it's going to go in either direction. So if someone's got a green dial, that means that
Hmm.
their default, their preset is to a healthy expression of this gene. And that if you have bad lifestyle, you can kind of crank the dial in a direction where it's going to have a bad expression, where things are going to be overdone or underdone and create symptoms or consequences. So whereas someone with a yellow dial or a red dial, their default is to not a good setting, or in a red case, a really bad setting. And you have to
Hmm.
work through lifestyle and environment and your mindset to have the dial be, to be consistently pushed in the direction of green. Your red and yellow dot will never be green. That will not happen unless you're dumb enough to inject CRISPR into your bicep. And if you want examples of that, look up Russian bicep CRISPR dude
Oh my
on the
gosh,
internet.
somebody actually does
Oh,
that.
his bicep is like a foot high. Like it's stupid. Like he was dumb enough to do it. So
Oh,
it's kind of like the show Jackass, but genetics version. So uh, So it's a real important point to know that your genes are fixed but flexible, but and it's a dial. They have a default setting and then they have a specific range. So that's epigenetics, is that your ability to shift the dial on your genetic expression, but you have to be consistent and sufficient in your lifestyle and environment and mindset and diet and all the rest of it to keep it pointing in the green direction of green if your default is red or yellow. Nutrigenomics
Uh-huh.
is the study of how specific nutrients at higher doses do an exponent do kind of a different shape curve, kind of a hockey stick curve on how they affect the epigenetic expression of a gene. Which an easier way to understand this is that 1 gram of fish oil in regards to inflammation is
Uh-huh.
nice. It'll throw widgets into the anti-inflammatory machinery. It's nice, but the research shows that over 2 grams of fish oil will not throw widgets into the machinery. It will change the machinery. It will change
Oh.
the machinery to be more anti-inflammatory. So, so when I was doing my 1 gram of fish oil, it was
Uh-huh.
woefully insufficient for my anti-inflammatory needs. Then that's just one example of a nutrigenomic change I made in my lifestyle from this report. And within a month or two, all my joint pain went away and it's still gone. So,
So let's just back up just a little
sure.
bit and make sure that everybody understands that even if you have a gene that is less optimal, let's say, and says that you are prone toward inflammation.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's kind of a very not really off base Freudian slip there because I would call inflation inflammation of the monetary system inflammation, but that's a different story. We can talk about that in another podcast.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So if you have a gene that's red for inflammation, it doesn't mean that you are sentenced to a lifetime of living in an inflammatory state. Epigenetics says that if you do specific lifestyle interventions, and that includes diet and supplements and meditation and mindset, things like that, activity, that you can affect the expression of that gene, even though the gene itself is not going to change because that's genetics. You can't change your gene without CRISPR. Um, you can affect how that gene is expressed and how that affects your body and your life. Is that a good way to describe that?
Yeah, yeah. So if you want another way to so if you have a seed is potential. And but how you treat the seed and how you care for the seed is gonna affect how it sprouts and how it expresses. And
Uh-huh.
then once it's up and sprouted, like how you continue to treat it also matters. And the genes are the same, but how you treat it will the genes will interpret whatever thing you do. And some people and their genes have a very harsh interpretation. Some people have an easier interpretation of what happens. It's some people just need more of a thing or less of a thing because based on how tightly wound or loose their genetic their genes are.
Okay. It makes me think of that movie Idiocracy, where the plants aren't growing because they're feeding the plants
The thirst
Pepsi.
mutilator. It's not Pepsi. They were feeding it they were feeding it Gatorade
Gatorade.
because it has electrolytes. Which if
Right,
you've watched
right,
the movie, you'll know that term electrolytes comes up a dozen times.
right.
Yeah. It's,
So,
it's a
so
great
even
movie. It's a funny movie slash terrifying, but go on.
absolutely in so many ways.
Yeah.
And it was a movie I blew off when it came out, and unfortunately think
Now
more
it's more
about.
prophecy than fiction, but yeah, go on.
Yes, yes. So if epigenetics is how you can influence the expression of your genes and how you can influence how your genes perform basically
Mhm.
through your lifestyle choices, and nutrigenomics is how you can influence your genes through supplementation?
There's specific higher dose nutrients. And so there's specific nutrients at higher amounts that have shown in the research to massively shift specific genes in a positive direction. So that's the study of nutrigenomics. It's like you're combining nutrition and genome together. That's what nutrigenomics, the conjunction of those things, those two words.
So nutrigenomics came out of the study of genetics and the
Mhm.
recognition that there is epigenetics, that your genes aren't a hardened, set, fast rule as
Nutrigenomics
to,
is a tool to express epigenetics.
there we go. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay.
And this is all good news because when people get their genetics reports back, they can, careen into nihilistic fatalism. It's like, oh my God, I've got red and yellow dots everywhere. I'm gonna die on Tuesday. Pass the Twinkies, live life. It's not like that. This actually happened to me when I got my genetics report. I remember because
Uh-huh.
I was at a conference. Um, I was actually at an acupuncture conference in Christchurch, New Zealand,
Uh-huh.
and I was staying at a colleague's place, and I got my report and looked at my genetics, and the first thing I did was I started to cry because I finally had answers as to why I was so unhealthy relative to everyone else. Because I had terrible genes when it comes to health. So explain why my health was so fragile and why, based on all the environmental issues and chemical issues and stress issues that I was assailed with growing up, why my constitution's been so weak and why I was so sick. When you have like Lyme plus stress plus sleep deprivation plus toxic food plus and if you have toxic food, you also have poor nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
really bad, terrible morning and evening routines, physical damage from the violence at school. Um, you've got poor digestive function, so you can't really absorb nutrients and becoming autotoxic from very slow bowel movement. Physical injuries that are winding up inflammation from the damage in the joints and tissues. I can go on and on and on. And then that explained why it just became this positive, or rather downward spiral. So I cried, number one, because I had an explanation, and then I cried also in relief because now I had a roadmap out, a different roadmap than from the other pathways I saw before. So, I mean, I have only up until, I mean, it's 10 years now, but only maybe in year it was either year 7 or 8 where I got dethroned
Mm-hmm.
from being the gold medalist in crap Eugene Olympics. And so, because I've run so many of these tests, I only up until 2, 3 years ago had the worst genes of anyone I've ever tested, and then I just got dethroned by one person, and another person dethroned me again. So now I'm a bronze medalist. Not that it's a competition, which it kind of is, but uh, I
I
I
hope that person wasn't me, but
no, it wasn't. It was another family member, but um. So, my, yeah, it was definitely not you.
okay.
It's definitely not a lot. You had a real mixture of like really good stuff and some
Uh-huh.
problematic stuff, but you definitely had some meaningfully protective components, but also some meaningful things that made you vulnerable. And the 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 message that I want to share with people about genetics is that don't be afraid of getting your genes tested because some people are like, well, I don't want to know. Like, well, you're gonna find out anyway because
Uh-huh.
if you live long enough and have enough stress or whatever toxic exposure happened to you, the weak links in your genetic chain are gonna break and you're gonna find out. So you're better off knowing now and actually doing things to push your genes in a preferable expression. Number two is like a genetics test is the single most valuable test dollar wise than any test on the planet without even a close second. And here's why. What you get in your genetics tests is good for life. You get it once and you're done. You've got the genes. Now, however long you plan on living, however many decades, you can amortize the cost of that test over however many decades, and it's effectively
Uh-huh.
nothing. Whereas other tests, which are great, which are valuable, which are wonderful, you have to just keep repeat every 3, 6, 9, 12 months, but not with
Uh-huh.
genetics. So I would really encourage people to get their genes tested because it's the single most high value test. And it can also determine your optimal diet, not just like what special nutrients that you need. And if we're talking about inflammation, there's several things around inflammation that are really worth knowing from a genetic lens, and this is a unique lens. So number
Uh-huh.
one, there are, like I mentioned before, there are hundreds of genes directly or indirectly related to inflammation, and then it's important to look at the upstream top dozen to a dozen and a half of them. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you look at those dozen to dozen and a half, the important thing is to not look at what's the 12 things I need to do for each of the 12 genes I have off. No, you want to look at what's the fewest number of interventions that's going to beneficially affect the most number of those inflammatory genes. So of those 15 genes, fish oil in over 2 grams has a research paper showing to eat to 10 of those 15 genes, a research paper done on humans, not wombats, nematodes, or mice, that beneficial that 2 gram minimum fish oil will beneficially shift the expression of those genes. So like fish oil as one thing can help 10 of the most important inflammatory genes. So
Mm-hmm.
the benefit of this test I run fit genes testing. Um,
Right.
the benefit is that we find for you the most important genes, and then what's the fewest number of recommendations to help the most number of beneficial genes. So you're not given 100 recommendations. You're like, here's the top five, top 10. Start there. Once you finish those, then you can go to the next. So there's a lot of this overwhelm with other genetics tests is avoided, where they just like, here's your 300 genes and associated 300 health tips, which aren't organized or
Right.
prioritized, and it's overwhelming. So, so the first thing on genetics is that you want to go to the top 50, the most important ones on inflammation, and then you want to
Uh-huh.
have them organized in a way where the interventions and recommendations are finding the fewest number affect the most number of inflammatory genes. Number two is that there are additional genes related to inflammation that are super important. Most notably VDR1 and VDR2. VDR stands for vitamin D receptors. Vitamin D
Uh-huh.
receptors. Now, VDRs, most people think of vitamin D genes. They think of the half dozen genes that regulate the conversion of sunlight into vitamin D3 in the blood. They're important, but that's only half the journey. Getting vitamin D into the blood is 50% of the way there. You can get vitamin D into the blood from sunlight, assuming you have the genes to do it, and assuming you're outside when there's enough UVB out, assuming you have enough skin exposure, and assuming you're out there for enough time. There's a lot of assumptions there in modern day. You can also get vitamin D into your blood from supplements or food.
Mm-hmm.
But getting into the blood is insufficient. You have to get it from blood into the cells. So the cells are these bilipid membrane spheres. Bilipid membrane means like it's got a double layer of fat to keep everything out and only has specific gates to let things in. And
Uh-huh.
so their vitamin D receptors are the gates on the surface of the cell to let the vitamin D through the walls.
Uh-huh.
And vitamin D controls between 3 to 5% of your entire human genome. There's about, 25,000 or so genes, plus or minus. So if it's
Wow.
controlling 3 to 5% of your genes, that's a lot of genes. Most of them are related to not bone density. It's there, but it's not the major thing. The major thing is
Uh-huh.
controlling inflammation in your immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a hard time absorbing vitamin D, that means you have a hard time controlling inflammation and controlling your immune system. And if you don't have a good immune system, you can get a lot of inflammation from infections running amok.
Right.
So vitamin D receptors, in my opinion, are actually more important than any of the top 15 inflammatory genes. And the reason why is because when I analyzed all the people I was working with who had chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
100% of them, minus one person, had double reds or double yellows or red yellow in their VDR1, VDR2 genes. The person who had double green, they had horrific formative chronic stress of a nature I shall not repeat. And that would drive anyone to a chronic illness if you experience the stress this person did. So the exception actually proves the rule. So I went to Dr. Beaver, who's the co-founder of Fit Genes, and if you want to listen to him directly, he doesn't really give interviews, but he let me interview him twice, once in 2017, once in 2019. That's available free on my
Hmm.
YouTube channel. I asked Dr. Beaver, look, you have access to the entire database and also the other top practitioners who run a lot of tests. Here's what I'm seeing clinically. 100% minus this one exception of people with chronic illness have red or yellow dots in their VDR genes. I think it's a pattern. Please go check the database and with the other practitioners. He got back to me, we'll call it a month later. He said, you're right.
Hmm.
We all see it too. I think there's actually a correlation there. So, what does this mean? That if you are not able to control your inflammation or your immune system, which will, if you can't control it, will create more inflammation, your risk of chronic disease is massive. It's massive. So when you're looking at genetic causes of inflammation, there's more than just, TNF alpha and interleukin 6, which are the two of the 15, which are the most famous of the
Hmm.
pro-inflammatory genes. You have to look at other genes that are massively influential on inflammation, such as VDR1, VDR2. Another cause of inflammation from a genetic standpoint are the free radical scavenging genes of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, which means you have to
Right.
burn protein, fats, and carbs in the presence of oxygen to make the body's equivalent of electricity called ATP. So a simpler analogy is if you take a piece of wood, put it in a fireplace, and light it on fire, the wood is the fuel and the oxygen in the air helps the fire burn. The problem is that when you burn fire, you make sparks. And if you're not careful, those sparks can fly and hit something else and cause something that shouldn't burn to start to burn. It's the
Uh-huh.
same in the mitochondria. When you burn protein, fats, and carbs in the presence of oxygen, you get a ton of sparks. Those sparks are called free radicals.
Hmm.
So you need janitors called enzymes to run around inside the mitochondria to catch the sparks to put them out, or the factory will catch on fire, which is really, really bad. Catching on fire
Hmm.
means inflammation. And when something's inflamed, you lose its function. So it means the factory can't function if it's on fire. Factories can't function if they're on fire.
Right.
So there are three janitors in the mitochondria, and they're enzymes. And the difference between it, some people, why not just take vitamin C? Yeah, vitamin C takes out one free radical. An enzyme can take out millions,
Mm.
millions.
Uh-huh.
So MN-SOD or manganese superoxide dismutase is the head janitor. He's technically is MN-SOD for I call him Mr. Sod, the head janitor, Mr. Sod. And his two subordinates, GPX1 and catalase, or CAT is the shorthand for the genetic, they run around and take these and catch these free radicals. They not only catch the free radicals, but they do something super cool. They convert the free radicals into oxygen and water, which is unbelievable. Imagine taking a spark from a fire and then turning that spark into oxygen and water. I mean, it's
Right.
it's almost unbelievable, but that's what our enzymes do. That's how amazing they are. Problem, if your genes coding for Mr. Sod and his two subordinates are red and yellow dots, you don't have as many or that they're slower than normal. So they can't catch all the sparks unless you have a really, really good lifestyle to ensure that Mr. Sod and his two subordinates are in tip-top shape. So
Ah.
if you don't have strong genes for those janitors, then you're a much, much higher risk of inflammation. And inflammation in the worst possible place, which is the mitochondria. Because if your mitochondria don't work, everything's going to suffer. Absolutely everything.
How can you tell if you have inflammation in your mitochondria?
Do you have chronic disease or not? Is one question.
Oh, so pretty much everybody who has an autoimmune disease.
So when you look at autoimmunity
Hmm.
and when you look at any chronic issue, you can draw a straight line back to damaged mitochondria. Now, what are the causes of damaged mitochondria could vary, whether it's
Okay.
infection. Now, I always look at is there an underlying genetic component that we can support using nutrigenomics and other
Uh-huh.
epigenetic lifestyle changes. And there's also other things we have to look at, like your genes won't tell you how much, mercury you've got in your system. The genes can tell you, like, if you do have metal poisoning, that if you're going to be way more affected by it than others, and therefore you may want to do certain things to make sure that you're in tip-top shape because your genes are struggle a bit, so that you're not so vulnerable. But you'd also look at other testing to see if you've got mercury poisoning, and then follow those protocols to specifically remove them in a safe way. So there's if
Wait,
someone's
wait.
got
So let me just back up just a second.
Sure.
So our genes can help explain why we may have grown up the same way as, say, a sibling, and
Mhm.
one sibling has an autoimmune or chronic disease, and the other one it does not.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So if someone's just having bad genes, air
Hmm.
quotes bad genes, means that you have a higher probability, not guarantee, of certain things expressing. Like we've got this BRCA2 thing going on, where people going around
Right.
Angelinaing themselves. And the reality is that only 50% of women with the BRCA2 gene ever express some sort of breast cancer. So even right there, in the most stark example, just because you have the gene is no guarantee. I have the genes for high blood pressure, red dots in them, but I don't have high blood pressure,
Uh-huh.
and I have plenty of salt. And the because I have a good lifestyle, though, and there's like a dozen other reasons you can have high blood pressure aside from salt. It's a reason, not the reason.
Right,
And
right.
by the way, speaking of inflammation, when I see people who have, red or yellow dots in the high blood pressure genes as it relates to salt, I almost never see high blood pressure. It does happen, but I mostly see water retention. And so when people are concerned about, like, look, I'm carrying all this weight. Some weight may not actually be caloric weight, it actually may be inflammatory water weight. In fact, that's what does happen with people. If they become overinflamed, they begin to swell with water.
Right,
And
right.
and one of the signs of having inflammatory damage is that you're carrying a lot of water weight. So, because what happens is that inflammatory chemicals are damaging to cells and tissues. So the body will retain water to dilute the pool of where all the inflammatory chemicals are, so they're less likely to hit and damage the cells. Um,
I always wondered that because I often see, maybe almost all the time, when people embark on an anti-inflammatory diet that is tailored for them, that they literally shrink
they shrink. Yeah,
and
they can lose
deflate.
pounds of water a day. My
Yeah.
father, who I took years to try to convince him to go on just one day of a paleo diet as opposed to
Uh-huh.
eating toasted bread and cheese all the time. And I told him, I said, all you can have chicken, coconut oil, coffee, broccoli, salt, pepper. You can have as much chicken, coconut oil, and broccoli as you want. So it wasn't a calorie thing. And he weighed
Uh-huh.
himself before he started, and then he weighed himself the next morning. And I watched him. He ate. He ate food. In one
Uh-huh.
day, he lost 4 pounds.
Wow.
And it had nothing to do with calories because he doesn't exercise. He
Uh-huh.
ate he ate calories. So he didn't burn extra calories. He didn't eat fewer calories. All that was inflammatory water weight. It's all inflammatory water weight. So um the other thing, so yeah, what I see, you see this in the CrossFit community a lot. People who do CrossFit who also have hyper-inflammatory genes, because like
Hmm.
there's two types of people in CrossFit who are super enthusiasts. Ripped, cut, bros, who like they have muscle tone. And then you've got these other people that are strong, but they don't have any visual muscle tone. They're kind of washed out and they've got like reddish, ruddy skin and they have this layer of water weight on them. It's because they're over exercising. And they've crossed that line of exercise from anti-inflammatory into pro-inflammatory. They've exceeded their body's capacity. I do this.
Uh-huh.
I can't exercise too much because if I over exercise, I get overinflamed because I have the genetic vulnerability. A telltale sign you're overinflamed is if you work out like these CrossFit enthusiasts and then for whatever reason you take work out every day and then for some reason you can't work out for a week, whether you're traveling or the gym's closed, you got injured or whatever, and then you you throw weights again a week later after a week off from rest, you have a higher personal record and you look better and you feel better and you lift stronger is because your body had time to get rid of the inflammation. And I actually
Ah.
gave a lecture at a genetics conference called Exercise-Induced Obesity, describing the very gene clusters that I saw as a pattern that identified the greatest risk of someone having this inflammatory water weight gain from over-exercising due to a hyperinflammatory set of gene clusters. So the to look out for things that will trigger epigenetics can go in either direction. You can either trigger a bad response or trigger a good response. So over-exercising for people, particularly people who are vulnerable, it's a bad response. The other genetics that people should look out for when it comes to inflammation is
Hmm.
histamine and food allergenicity risk. So with histamine insensitivity, now a lot of people may have heard of histamine sensitivity. The way that I understand histamine is that it's a specific branch of the inflammatory system and has a very specific job. Histamine is the body's emergency flood switch. So if I'm stung by a bee or a wasp or a spider bite or bitten by a snake or stung by a centipede or jabbed by certain plants and I'm injected with venom or a toxin or whatever it might be, a bee stings my arm and my arm swells up. The bee did not inject a half quart of water into my arm. What happened is the bee injected venom. The body recognized this is a poison that could corrode and erode muscle, tissue, other tissues, vessels, arteries, nerves. And certain snake venom can melt bone. Like there's it's like, oh, look, something incredibly poisonous in a concentrated bolus. Let's flood the area with water to dilute the venom, dilute the poison, to buy our liver and kidneys time to filter it out as safely as possible. So histamine is the emergency flood switch. If you have too much histamine, two bad things can happen. One, you can overswell and choke out the very arteries, nerves, and veins you were trying to protect, or lock out the
Hmm.
joint. And if you're trying to get away from something that's also poisonous, and suddenly your leg locks up because your joint is swollen stiff, that's bad. The other
Right.
is that you can overreact and your throat can close. So this is you see some people that are reactive to shrimp or whatever, and their throat closes. So that's an overshoot of the histamine response. The undershoot is that if you don't swell enough, then the poison and venom is going to destroy your tissues. So there has to be this kind of dance here. Now, if someone is genetically histamine sensitive, that means that if they eat foods that are either high in histamine and you're just eating histamine along with your food, or the
Uh-huh.
foods will trigger your body's increased internal production of its own histamine, called
Uh-huh.
endogenous histamine production, or what you eat will shut down, block, or slow the enzyme that breaks down excessive histamine in the body. Either way, you're going to end up with the same result, more histamine. So if you eat a food that provokes more histamine in the body, it's the equivalent of eating a full body, slow moving bee sting. And you begin to swell through your whole body, particularly around your gut where your intestines are. So when people like that who are histamine sensitive, they can put on a lot of weight that has nothing to do with calories and nothing to do with how much you exercise. It has to do with your histamine sensitivity and the body's response to water by taking on water. So these are the people that if you tell them to eat less and exercise more, it's not going to work because if they're already eating a high histamine diet, they're usually a lot of high histamine foods are quite yummy, like, and I say this at great personal risk, avocado. You know, so we probably just lost half the audience right there. I'm sorry. I just
That was my
destroyed the
breakfast this
algorithm.
morning.
I just destroyed the algorithm. I'm sorry. So so histamine sensitivity can create it's a branch of the inflammatory system. And along with that are checking the genes for risk of allergic responses. So there's a cluster of genes that are not specific to any specific allergen, but they basically determine how tightly wound up you are to any allergenic food. So,
Mhm.
the top ones, soy, gluten, dairy, shellfish, peanuts, and tree nuts, etc. you're just as a hyper-reactive response to it. So when people's immune system are that sensitive, you can create an inflammatory immune response. So when I run people's genetics, I look
Hmm.
for their genes for histamine and food allergenicity. And so what I do is I put together an anti-inflammatory, antihistamine diet that people who are genetically vulnerable can just take this diet and run with it and understand how to shop in a way that's low allergen and low histamine. And the other benefit is that if you're going to eat this type of diet, it's also like no dairy, no gluten. It's very the foods that are low histamine that we've picked on the good column, the good food column,
Hmm.
they're all anti-inflammatory pretty much anyway. So, but just other people who are wanting to look up antihistamine diets and they have dismay of like, oh my God, my favorite things, coffee, chocolate, avocados, ground meat. Did I mention the avocados? The you've got the way to win an antihistamine diet because there's lists of antihistamine diets. The way to win, the best diet for your health is the most appropriate one for your needs that you'll actually do.
Hmm.
So with an antihistamine diet, dosage matters. So I tell people just pick your top 10 favorite high histamine foods and keep eating them because dosage matters and just cut out the rest. That's what I do. I'm sensitive to histamine. I have my top 10. Ground meat, leftovers, uh, pickles, uh, ketchup, mustard, hot dogs, sauerkraut, coconut products. That's it. I think those are my top 10. And it's like my quality of life really doesn't suffer. It really doesn't. And as soon as I recommended the top 10, just pick your top 10 and don't argue with me anymore. People stopped arguing. It was great. I had so the
So
it
those
just
are the top 10 that you avoid or the top.
no, there's a top 10 that I continue to eat and cut out
Oh,
the rest.
ah.
Yeah. I continue to eat those things and because dosage matters, then I just cut out the other stuff that's high histamine. Yeah, and I have
And
chocolate.
don't
Yeah, that's those 10.
just because something a food has or is considered to be high histamine doesn't mean that every person will react the same
No,
way to
absolutely.
that
That's the whole point of
food.
genetics. That's what we've been talking about. Some
Right.
people are sensitive to it, some people are not. And also, it's not like the particular food. It's also how pre-inflamed are you? What is the amount of this high histamine food you're eating at any given time, and how consistently are you eating that amount day to day, day to day, day to day? So you're just creating this constant loading. So there's a lot of variables there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I totally get that. Okay, so we've talked about the VDR genes. We've
Mm.
talked about um, other types of vitamin D receptors. So, what are some surprise genes that actually affect inflammation in the body that we might not have related to that?
So the AMY1 gene copy number, which is a fancy way of saying AMY1 is the gene that makes amylase or the enzyme that breaks down carbs in the saliva. And um if you this is not a green, yellow, red dot situation, it's the number of duplicates of this gene. So imagine your digestion is a fortress and the Visigoths charging the fort are carbohydrates and you've got cannons lining the fort. The green, yellow, red dot is like what version is the cannon, but the number of duplicates is the number of cannons. And in the case of Amy 1, there's very little difference between green, yellow, and red version. Just for ease of numbers, we'll say like green shoots out 100 units, yellow is
Hmm.
95, red is 90. So there's really immaterial difference between them. But there's a huge difference between one cannon and 10 cannons. Let's just say you had the one green cannon and 10 red. It's the difference between 100 units and 900 units.
Right.
Totally different world. So the number of these genes is much more important than the version. So if I use Mediterranean style diet types are like sixes and sevens, low end are like five and eight, high end is eight. But that's the number of copies of this gene. I was eating that I was eating like a Mediterranean diet. Then I was still getting these, as I mentioned before, these like mood fluctuations, digestive fluctuations, and energy fluctuations. When I ran this specialized gene test called Carb Choice, I didn't have five, six, seven, or eight genes. I had two. I had the second lowest copy number duplicates you can possibly have. So I'm actually a low carb paleo. One people have one copy, they're basically keto style. Twos are straddling the paleo keto world. Threes and fours are more paleo. Five to eights are shades of gray of Mediterranean. Nine and above are higher carbs. So within 1 week of changing my diet to my genetic capacity of carbs, my mood, my energy, and my digestion leveled out. So when you're talking about surprise genes for inflammation, your ability to digest carbohydrates properly, if you eat outside that window, you're at risk of inflammation in your gut, where most of the inflammation happens anyway.
Now, what happens if you supplement with amylase? Can you counteract that?
You can, but the problem is that people who have lower copies of this gene also have much more exaggerated spikes of insulin. It's not just breaking down the carbs, it's the insulin response. So, which makes sense from an evolutionary biology standpoint. Like my heritage comes from the northern latitudes where there was not a lot of agriculture.
Uh-huh.
It was hunting and gathering like roots and maybe some fruit once a year. So, if you are in a hunter-gatherer society, particularly in the northern latitudes, there's not a lot of spare carbs to go around except the occasional fruit tree and some honey. And so, if you are in that hunter-gatherer society and you come across just the jackpot of a thing of berries, you've got like 1 day before the bears, insects, the deer, or other rival tribes or people in your own tribe find this thing and eat all the berries before you. So you've got to scourge yourself as quickly as possible with all these carbs and absorb it as quickly as possible so that your body just spits out this massive amount of insulin to try to soak up as many of those carbs as possible versus being in like the Fertile Crescent or wherever somewhere else where there's a lot more carbs to be available, much more reliable. They can not only break down more carbohydrates in their saliva, but they have a much more slower, even insulin response
Hmm.
because it's just been over the course. People say, "Oh, your genes hasn't changed in how many tens of thousands of years." That's not entirely true. There are certain genes on the periphery that can have fluctuating changes. It's not a matter. It's a difference of degree, that you can have people that there's these things on the edges of our genetic capacity that can vary. It doesn't have to be the version of the gene, but it can be the number of the duplicates of the gene that can change. So to make it more, like for example, in China, a lot of this test has been done in China. We have the people who have the highest amounts of people with the highest rates of diabetes in the world are
Uh-huh.
Inuit, Native American, Maori, Aborigine, and especially Pacific Islander. And you know what was found doing carb choice in these populations? They have on average, the lowest copy numbers of the AMY1 gene. The lowest numbers have the highest rates of diabetes. Why? Because they had the insulin response is so exaggerated because all of these cultures did not grow up with agriculture. They
Right.
didn't. So, I mean, yeah, you have like one exception in like around the Michigan area where there was wild rice, but that's it, you know? So you've got culture. So people with the higher copy numbers, like in China, their average is 8. In Europe, it's like 6. Now, China has had a rice culture for thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years. And rice,
Hmm.
ironically, inhibits amylase production.
Oh,
So what that it doesn't mean it stops it, it just slows it down. So that means that when you look at Europe as an agriculture, but not a rice culture, China, agriculture, but it's a rice culture. So my interpretation, and I'm the one who pointed this out to Dr. Beaver, I said
Uh-huh.
because the original carb choice report was talking about this thing with the average in China over here versus the thing on this like 10 pages later. And I read the thing and this is the way my brain works. I'm like, wait a minute. Hey, Dr. Beaver, I think the reason why in China there's on average two more copies of this gene is to make up for the inhibitory nature of rice on amylase. And he just looked at me and he said, I think you're right. Because it follows the same first principles logic of evolutionary adaptation to your calorie source. So when people find out about their genetic reality around their carb tolerance, that has massive implications for their diet going forward forever. And
Hmm.
the report that I put together on carb choice teaches people how to actually adapt their carb choice number to their individual size and their portions. So when people do, if they decide to do genetics with fit genes, uh, then they get a very specific set of reports that are catered to making this really winnable and actionable. One thing I didn't like
Hmm.
about most genetics reports I've seen is that they're too jargony, they're too overwhelming, they're hard to read, and there's too much geeky stuff, and it's not written for the ease of a layperson to understand and more important, enact and to
Right.
implement. So that's how I've designed my reports is that they're understandable and more importantly actionable. And it includes this very rare test on how to determine your optimal diet. That one's called carb choice. The other one we talked about that has the inflammatory genes, plus tons more like your exercise genes, immune genes, food behavior genes, your relationship to caffeine, your relationship to alcohol, your relationship to satiety, bitter foods, etc. Like that one's called the Fit Genes Genetic Blueprint, and the one with carb choice calls the Carb Choice Blueprint.
Which is super fascinating, having gone through these tests myself, beyond inflammation, which of course is at top of mind for me all the time.
Hmm.
But beyond that, it was really fascinating to say, oh, you know what? The reason I like sweet tastes more than bitter tastes is coded in my genes.
Yep.
This isn't some sort of moral weakness that I like sweet foods or things like that. It is actually genetic based, and I come by it honestly. So there are a lot of really interesting insights to be learned from your genes and really interesting actionable steps, as you were saying, to take that I've never seen laid out elsewhere in all my several decades of studying natural health. None of these things really have come up. So it's all cutting edge science that can really make a huge difference in how you feel every single day, how your body is functioning in a
Absolutely.
different way than doing other kind of, I don't want to say random, but certainly random compared to following your genetic blueprint.
Well, I'd say that I want to call it random. I would just say not prioritized.
Mm-hmm.
Like there, I mean, the other genetics tests, they cluster the genes together by function. Like,
Uh-huh.
but what happens like those functions aren't prioritized themselves against each other. And then it's also not clear that they've actually prioritized the genes within those functions either. So my more information is not better. Better organized and prioritized information is better. And that's what we strive to do at FitGenes.
That's very well said. Okay, I think that's a really good segue to talk about how people can get more information from you and learn about
Mhm.
getting their own genetic testing.
So for practitioners who want to run FitGenes in their practice, if you're a
Hmm.
practitioner and you're listening to this and you're in the health field, um, go to fitgenesusa.com. That's for practitioners to sign up to run FitGenes USA in their practice. And I'm the lead educator and coordinator for FitGenes in the Western Hemisphere. I'm also the lead instructor for the rest of the world. And I can show you how to do this for your own clients and patients in your practice. For people who are interested in getting their fit genes test with me, they can go to drsamshay.com and click on DNA Decoded. That's DNA Decoded. And then there'll be a special coupon for a massive discount for people who are listening to this. And I have a special program that where I include the tests, your personalized reports, access to my learning library, implementation program, as well as I do live group coaching for people who join. You get that for 6 months, and also supplement discounts for the genetic based products. So that's available. You can just click on the link and use the coupon code that for Elizabeth's podcast listeners.
Great. Yes, that will be in the show notes for anyone who is listening and or watching. And is there anything else, any final words of wisdom you want to leave us with today about inflammation and your genes?
So the number one piece of information I can offer is to just get your genes tested. You won't regret it. It's one test, you do it once, and the dividends are just paid out over decades. And there's so much information that you can't get from other tests. And it can be absolutely life-changing. It was for me. And this is why I'm so enthusiastic about doing this, is that genetic testing is so powerful and so straightforward. And the test is easy. It's a cheek swab. It's not urine. It's not stool. It's not a blood draw. You don't have to pluck any hair out. You don't have to spit. You just cheek swab on cheek, and you're done. So it's a really easy test, and 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 the information you get is invaluable.
Yes, very different than like the ancestry.com type genetic testing.
No, this test doesn't
This
tell you what percentage Irish you are. Sorry.
No. People ask me that all the time when I tell
No,
them
no, no,
about genetic
no,
testing.
no,
Like,
no, no. I can't tell
oh,
you. I can't tell you about Uncle Jim. Sorry.
well. No, it's not going to show your paternity. Nothing like that. But really, really valuable stuff and so much data to go through, but in a very digestible format. I think my test had like 94 pages worth of information, but in front of each section, there's kind of a breakdown that tells you really the key information to understand out of that
I mean, really,
section.
the first like pages, I think 5 through 11, like the first 4 pages, like intro and table of contents. But what the way I designed the report was that page 5 is a one-page summary of the most important things for your diet, supplements, exercise, and hydration. And then pages 6 through 11 is just diet, hydration, supplements, exercise, and just start there. The other, people hear over a 90-page report, they can start to freak out, but they're broken up into specific sections, but the most important things to get started are at the top. And like that's plenty to get started with. And the rest of the report is just much more detail on those specific things, but it's really was designed to make it winnable and prioritize. And so it's don't let the page number of the report intimidate you. Just pages 5 through 11 are like just start here and away you go.
It's true. It's very accessible. There's very clear entry points into understanding what your DNA is telling you and how you should act
Mhm.
accordingly.
Totally.
Sam, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I
No,
think
you're
this
welcome, Elizabeth.
is really informative and very new science, right? This is not something we grew up knowing, or even maybe our doctors went to medical school to hear about. And
It's
I
new.
don't
It's
even
new
know.
as of, I would say it's new as of like, I don't know when the first real commercially viable tests came about, but basically the genome was sequenced while I was in college in the early 2000s. And I think the real first commercially available ones, I'd have to check my dates, but I'm guessing it was likely mid to late 2000s. So you have entire generations, like basically only now are people getting into medical school who have been around from when the genome has always been sequenced. They were born after the first genome was actually fully sequenced. So we're not even in the first generation of doctors coming out of any type of medical school graduating because they're only like 24 years old at this point. So it is new. It is new relative to those generations, but the actual genetic testing has been around for, I would say, 15 to 20 years and has matured greatly in that time and only
Yes,
getting more and more mature.
because when it came out, it wasn't something that you could take individually and use to improve
No,
and enhance your own life.
no, not no. It took about a decade or so of maturation for it to work out. But now we can skip the we can skip the line here, and now it's just really straightforward. It's just cheek swab, and you get the results back in a couple weeks. And it's like, and then just from that information, you can change your life going forward.
Really, really important stuff to know, especially as those of us who are interested in this podcast are looking at inflammation and how can we tame that inflammation and how can we live good, healthy, strong, functional lives despite even maybe having some of these genes which are not so great for being inflammatory. So there's hope. There's always things that you can do. There's ways that you can change your how your genes manifest in your body, even if you don't have optimal genes for this.
Really.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for explaining this.
You're very welcome, Elizabeth. It was great to chat with you.
It was so good. We'll have to do it again.
Definitely.
All right. So thank you. Turn in next time to the Inflammation Investigator. And that's another case filed on the Inflammation Investigator. Remember, every symptom is your body's way of communicating. We just need to learn the language. If today's episode sparked something for you, I want to hear about it. Share your own investigation discoveries with me on social media at Elizabeth Yarnell or find me at elizabethyarnell.com. Your experience could be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And here's the thing about investigations. They work best when you're not going it alone. If this podcast is helping you uncover the answers you've been searching for, please like, rate, subscribe, and review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. As a new podcast, these actions mean more than you know. Want to dive deeper into your own inflammation investigation? Head over to inflammationinvestigator.com, where you can take my free inflammation quiz to uncover which hidden triggers might be affecting your health. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Yarnell, your inflammation investigator, reminding you that the solutions to your health issues are out there. Let's find them together.